You don't deserve to be my mother-in-law.
Whoa!
Why?
Why did you do that to my mother?
Some tragedies don't begin with hatred, but when pride and ambition become greater than gratitude. This wedding day didn't just expose one person. It exposed a truth many people try to avoid. Every choice comes with a price. This story is told from Lagos, Nigeria. Listen to the story until the end, not to judge others, but to reflect on yourself. A question for you. When you are hurt, will you choose to protect a family, or let a moment of anger destroy everything? Subscribe and turn on notifications to continue exploring stories about truth, family, and consequences that never sleep.
After the wedding ceremony, the large doors of the family banquet room slowly closed, sealing off the outside world and leaving behind a private space reserved only for those considered blood relatives. Warm golden light spilled over a long ebony dining table, where the two families sat facing one another like two lineages newly tied together by a fragile thread called marriage. Laughter filled the room. One congratulatory toast followed another. Crystal glasses clinked, their clear sound seeming to announce a perfect beginning. Amara was still wearing her wedding dress. The pure white gown, its long train brushing against the cold stone floor, carried the delicate vulnerability of a young woman who had just crossed the invisible line between daughter and the daughter-in-law. Her hair was neatly pinned at the nape of her neck, a few loose strands falling softly, barely concealing the subtle tension in her slender shoulders. She rose when it was time to perform the traditional ritual. With both hands, Amara lifted the bowl of hot soup, steam curled upward, forming a thin mist that blurred her face. Her eyes were lowered, her lashes trembling slightly. No one could see the true expression hidden beneath her flawless makeup. From the outside, the bride appeared gentle and perfectly composed, so perfect that no more one suspected a thing, no more one except her. At the head of the table, Ngozi, her mother-in-law, slowly stood up. She carried the unmistakable presence of a matriarch, straight-backed, sharp-eyed, her lips fixed in a practiced, gracious smile. She wore an expensive traditional outfit, coral beads resting around her neck, symbols of authority and family power. "You've worked hard, my child," Ngozi sighed, her voice low and steady, loud enough for everyone to hear. Amara stepped forward. Each of her footsteps was so light it barely made a sound. Yet inside, her heart pounded heavily, as if striking against a door that had been locked for years. The bowl in her hands felt hotter than she expected. Or perhaps, it was the memories, burning her palms from within. The distance between Amara and her mother-in-law narrowed to the length of an outstretched arm. Ngozi smiled and reached out to receive the bowl. Her gaze swept over Amara's face, lingering for a brief moment, so brief that no more one else noticed. But Amara did. In that instant, the smile did not reach her eyes. Something flickered, sir. Cold, calculating, and terrifyingly familiar. Amara bowed her head slightly, perfectly in line with tradition. She sensed a hush settle over the table, the kind of silence that precedes what is believed to be a sacred moment. Everyone held their breath, not out of fear, but because they believed they were witnessing the flawless image of a newly formed family. No more one knew that beneath the white wedding dress, Amara's legs were trembling ever so slightly. No more one knew that her mind was not filled with blessings but with fragments of buried memories, quietly forcing their way back to the surface. And no more one knew. This was not the beginning of a home. It was the last moment of calm before everything shattered. Just as Moses had touched the bowl of soup, a burst of laughter erupted from the far end of the table, shattering the solemn moment. Someone began telling a harmless story about weddings in the family, about a bride long ago who had clumsily spilled wine on her mother-in-law's dress. Andy had been forced to kneel. Andy apologized in front of the relatives. Everyone laughed along, relieved, as if those memories were nothing more than harmless seasoning in the recipe of marriage. Amara did not laugh. She remained frozen in place, both hands holding the bowl, steam still rising, blurring the boundary between the present and the past. Within the thin mist, another room appeared, darker, narrower, a place where words as sharp as knives had once been spoken in a tone as calm as that familiar smile. "My child, know your place." The voice did not echo through the banquet hall, yet it struck Amara's temples with force, making her fingers tighten. The bowl trembled ever so slightly, just enough for a drop of hot liquid to spill over the rim. Amara felt the heat against her skin, a clear reminder. Some burns leave no more scars on the hands, but carve themselves deep into memory. Ngozi took the bowl. She lifted it to chest level. Andy nodded, like a matriarch satisfied with her daughter-in-law's proper conduct. The golden light reflected off her coral beads, breaking into small, orderly points of light exactly like the way she had arranged everything in her life. Neat, controlled, allowing no more deviation. Our family values propriety, she continued warmly. From this day on, you belong to this house. The words landed on the table as lightly as a blessing. But the Amara, they weighed like a sentence already signed. She bowed a little deeper, in perfect accordance with custom. Beneath her lowered lashes her gaze swept across the faces around the table. The groom beside her, lips pressed tight with pride tinged by exhaustion. The relatives nodding in approval. Andy, the watchful eyes quietly measuring the worth of a woman who had just been taken in. No more one asked Amara what she thought. No more one noticed that her hands were trembling not from nerves, but from a decision that had been silently made long ago. A servant stepped forward. Andy gently pulled out a chair for Nosy. The chair scraped against the floor with a grating sound, like metal dragged across stone. Amara straightened. For a brief moment, her eyes met Nosy's once more. This time, there was no more smile. Only a short silence, just long enough for both women to understand that they were seeing each other clearly now. Not as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, but through the lens of what had happened and what had never been spoken aloud. The feast went on. More dishes were served. The conversation shifted to future plans, children, expectations. The steady clinking of cutlery masked the heartbeat that had fallen out of rhythm. Amara returned to her seat. Her wedding dress rustled softly. She placed her hands on her lap and took a deep breath. Somewhere in her chest, a fragile thread snapped. No more one noticed.
And that lack of notice, the collective calm in the face of a widening crack, was the most frightening thing of all. Because sometimes, tragedy does not arrive with thunder. It arrives with perfectly polite smiles, and a banquet that continues as if everything is just fine. Amara stood up once more. No one noticed right away. In the banquet room, conversation continued in a low murmur, spoons clinking against bowls with the familiar sounds of what still felt like an ordinary family meal. A relative was talking about an upcoming business trip. Someone chuckled softly, someone else nodded. Out of politeness. Only Amara's chair slid back quietly. She turned toward the kitchen behind the dark wooden door. The door closed behind her, cutting off the laughter and sealing her inside a narrow, hot, stifling space. Steam and the scent of spices clung to the air. A freshly ladled bowl of soup sat on the counter, still steaming. Amara stood motionless before it. In that moment, time seemed to slow. The pounding of her heart was so loud it drowned out everything else. She stared into the rising mist, and within it, old images surged back, half-smiling commands, looks of quiet contempt, reminders that she had been chosen only because she fit. She reached out. The heat of the bowl burned her skin instantly, but Amara did not let go. She gripped it tightly, as if the pain were the only thing anchoring her to the present. A few seconds later, she stepped back out, still in her pristine white wedding dress. The bodice clung to her frame, the train brushing softly across the floor. Slowly, curiously, eyes turned toward her. Some people smiled, assuming she was simply resuming the unfinished ritual. Her mother-in-law Ngozi rose by instinct, the reflex of someone accustomed to holding the center of the room. She took a step forward, extending her hands to receive the bowl, the gentle smile already restored to her lips. The distance between them was less than a meter. In that moment, Amara lifted her head. Her eyes were no longer lowered. "Do you really think you have the right to look down on me?" The scream tore through the room like a blade. The entire hall froze. Half-spoken sentences died in throats. No one had time to understand what was happening. No one had time to stand, to intervene, to stop it. There was only one movement. Amara sharply twisted her wrist. The bowl of hot soup flew forward. In an instant, thick steam exploded into the air, then collapsed into chaos. The scalding liquid poured over Ngozi's head and shoulders, soaking her carefully styled hair and seeping into the expensive fabric of her dress. A scream rang out, shrill, panicked, agonizing. Ngozi staggered backward, arms flailing, her face contorted in shock. A chair crashed to the floor. Someone shouted for the servants. Someone else jumped up so abruptly that the table lurched. Amara's wedding dress was splattered, streaks of hot soup staining the pure white fabric. as if that very innocence had been violently torn apart in front of everyone. Amara stood still. She did not scream again. She did not cry out. She did not run. At last, tears welled in her eyes, but they were not weak tears. They fell slowly, heavily, like a price finally paid after years of silence. The room shattered into noise and confusion. Yet at the very center of it all, Amara remained standing, a bride in a white wedding dress, her hands trembling from the burns, her gaze strangely empty, as if she knew perfectly well this moment would end everything. And in this very moment, she had finally stopped being silent. The scream had not yet faded when the groom rushed forward. He dropped to his knees beside his mother, trembling hands catching Ngozi's unsteady body as she swayed. The smell of hot soup, scorched fabric, and raw panic blended together, turning the air thick and suffocating. "Call a doctor, now," someone shouted. At the same moment, two bodyguards stormed in from opposite sides. Their movements were swift and cold, honed by situations far more dangerous than this. Amara barely had time to step back before her arms were wrenched behind her and locked in place. The white wedding dress was pulled askew, its delicate lace crushed in someone else's grip. Amara did not resist. She stood still, breathing hard, her eyes fixed on Ngozi being helped into a chair. In that moment, there was no rage left on Amara's face, no regret either, only a hollow exhaustion, as if everything had unfolded exactly as she had always imagined it would. "Enough." The voice came from the head of the table, low, steady, carrying an authority that silenced the room instantly. The oldest man of the family slowly rose to his feet. He did not shout. He did not panic. His gaze swept over the chaos, then settled on Amara, lingering there for a long time. "Turn on the screen." A brief, decisive gesture. The large LED screen mounted on the wall, normally reserved for wedding photos, suddenly lit up. A cold blue glow washed over the room, draining the color from every face. The first image appeared, security camera footage, not from the banquet hall, but from inside the mansion. Amara appeared on the screen, no wedding dress, no gentle composure. She was on the phone, her voice low and sharp. "She's just an obstacle. Once the transfer papers are signed, everything will change." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. The footage cut quickly. Messages filled the screen, each line magnified. Plans laid out neatly, step by step. Words that were cold, calculating, bearing no trace of someone entering a marriage for love. "As long as she still trusts me, everything will be easy." An audio recording followed. Amara's voice clear, undeniable. The room felt as though all the air had been sucked out. The groom stood frozen. The hand resting on his mother's shoulder slowly fell away. He stared at the screen, then turned to Amara, his eyes shattered, no longer burning with anger, only with the collapse of a trust placed in the wrong person. "Amara," he said hoarsely, "did you never see this place as home?" Amara did not answer. She stared straight ahead, where the final image had paused, a message never sent, yet saved on the phone. "Don't forget, this is only a transaction." A choked sob broke the silence. Ngozi, her hair disheveled, her face twisted in pain, raised a trembling hand to her chest. Tears spilled freely, beyond control. "I treated you like my own child," she said, her voice breaking apart. "I thought, as long as you were sincere, I could give you everything." It was not an accusation. It sounded like a confession spoken too late. The entire hall sank into a heavy silence. No more crying, no more scraping chairs, only the naked truth hanging in the air, cold and unforgiving. Amara slowly closed her eyes. For the first time since she had entered this room, her shoulders trembled, not because she was being restrained, but because everything that had been exposed had left no way back. The sound of police sirens echoed outside the mansion gates while the sun had not yet set. It wasn't a piercing noise, but it was sharp enough to sever the final remnants of the wedding day. Black vehicles lined up, doors opened. Dark blue uniforms stepped into a space once decorated with white flowers and scented candles. No one spoke another word. Two officers walked straight toward Amara. She stood in the middle of the banquet hall, a place that not long ago had been filled with congratulations and laughter. Now the stone floor felt cold, streaked with dark stains where the soup had dried. Amara's wedding dress dragged across the ground, its lace torn, smeared with dust and the marks of chaotic footsteps. "Ms. Amara," a formal voice said, "you are being detained for questioning." Her wrists were brought forward. The handcuffs snapped shut with a dry, metallic click, short, precise, final. The sound echoed through the silent hall, like a period at the end of a play that had gone too far. Amara did not resist. She did not cry. Her eyes were empty, staring straight ahead, as if every emotion had been drained from her. The carefully prepared explanations no longer mattered. There was no one left to convince, no role left to perform. The groom stood a few steps away. He did not come closer. He did not step back. He simply stood there, silently watching the woman he had once called his wife. His eyes held neither anger nor love, only the late awakening of someone who realized he had placed his trust in the wrong hands. "You didn't lose this family because you were poor." His voice was hoarse, but every word was clear. "You lost it because you didn't know how to value people's hearts." Amara blinked softly. For the first time, something like regret crossed her face, brief, faint, and then gone. Some words arrived too late to save anything. The officers signaled. Amara was led away. Each step she took was heaven, not because of the filthy, soaked wedding dress dragging behind her, but because of the silence of those standing along the aisle. No one spoke in judgment. No one offered pity. That silence was more cruel than any accusation. The large doors of the banquet hall opened. Outside light flooded in for a brief moment, then was cut off as the doors closed behind Amara. Bang! The sound landed deep and dull. In that instant, the wedding officially ended, not with a final song, not with a kiss, but with the closing of a door between two worlds, one holding a past shaped by wrong choices, the other holding a price that could not be escaped. Inside the remaining room, the flowers were still white, the candles still burning, the banquet table untouched, yet no one looked at them the same way again, because from that moment on, everyone understood. Some tragedies do not take years to form. They require only a single wedding day, and one person who does not know how to value the hearts of others. Time passed as if the wedding day stained by tragedy had never existed. The garden behind the mansion was strangely quiet. Old trees cast their shadows over the stone-paved path, where the afternoon sunlight fell in soft patches of pale gold. A gentle breeze carried the scent of damp earth and wildflowers, the smell of life continuing, indifferent to the fractures that had occurred. Ngozi sat alone on the familiar wooden bench. "Ttccac non vitto la inguidamo." The wound on her head had healed. The scar faded a little more each day, just as time quietly softens pains once thought unbearable. She lifted a hand to her neck, where the coral beads, once a symbol of power, used to rest. Today, she was not wearing them. In this moment of stillness, she was no longer the mother-in-law standing in a lavish wedding hall, nor the matriarch of a powerful family. She was simply a woman who had placed her trust in the wrong place, and had paid for it with awakening. Her gaze drifted toward the ivy-covered wall, gently stirring in the wind. Old memories no longer hurt as they once had. They appeared clearly now, bare and unfiltered, yet they no longer had the power to break her. Some lessons arrive only after everything has shattered, and only those who survive the shattering truly understand their worth. Elsewhere, far from this quiet garden, Amara was facing long, cold days ahead. No white wedding dress, no gentle role to play, only silent walls and time, the one thing that cannot be bought, bargained with, or blamed. And the groom, the man who once stood at the center of the ceremony, had learned to slow down. He did not try to forget. He chose to remember, so he would not repeat the same mistakes. Some losses cannot be replaced, but they can become the starting point of a more honest life. The narrator's voice rose, low and deliberate, like a closing reflection meant for no one in particular. Some days do not expose people, they expose the truth itself. And when the truth emerges, cause and effect leave no one untouched. The camera slowly pulled away from the garden. Ngozi stood up and walked along the familiar path, her steps steadier than before, not because she had forgotten, but because she had understood.